Police officer arrests and charges judge with car theft because she's black, but prosecutor. Night had fallen over the city, shrouding the streets in a heavy silence, interrupted only by the distant roar of engines and flashes of light from headlights passing along the main avenue. The glass and steel buildings cast golden reflections on the damp asphalt, evidence of the light rain that had fallen earlier in the evening. The air was cool, with a mixed smell of wet earth and exhaust fumes. Clarice Beaufort, a black woman of 40, emerged from the majestic lobby of the Belcourt Hotel, where she had attended an official dinner. The event brought together the highest figures of the bar, from magistrates to prosecutors, in a cozy atmosphere, punctuated by toasts with glasses of champagne and discussions that were as strategic as they were formal. With a confident step, she crossed the cobblestone sidewalk towards her car, a black sedan with impeccable finishes. Her custom-made navy blue suit hugged her curves elegantly, and her patent pumps clicked gently against the stone. She carried the weight of the day on her shoulders, a discreet fatigue hidden behind her straight posture and her determined look. As she got into her vehicle, she let out a sigh. His days were long, made up of decisions that impacted lives, careful analyses and incessant fights against injustice. Tonight, all she wanted was to go home, take off her shoes, sit on her couch and enjoy a glass of red wine in front of soothing music. The engine hummed softly as she started it, and the car slid silently across the asphalt as it sped away from the brightly lit city center. The streets were quieter in this part of the city, where wide tree-lined avenues led to upscale residential neighborhoods. The villas with elegant gates stood behind perfectly trimmed hedges, testifying to the prestige and tranquility of the place. But as she drove at a moderate speed, enjoying the smooth ride, a flash of light caught her attention in her rearview mirror. A police car pulled up behind her, its white headlights illuminating the rear of its vehicle. A second later, the red and blue lights began to flash, throwing bursts of color onto the dark road.
A siren sounded, breaking the peaceful silence of the night.
Clarice felt her stomach contract. She sighed, took a quick look at her speedometer. She wasn't going above the speed limit, then activated her indicator and gradually slowed down. His vehicle stopped on the shoulder, under a lamppost whose pale light accentuated the contrasts of the scene. She knew this kind of situation too well. The police car door opened, and a white policeman approached slowly, his silhouette silhouetted against the shadows cast by the headlights. He had a confident, almost arrogant walk. One hand placed on his belt, the other holding a flashlight which he shone roughly on his face. He stopped just at the height of his window.
Good evening, madam.
Vehicle documents and driving license. His voice was dry, authoritarian. He hadn't given her the slightest explanation. Clarice, without losing her calm, opened her bag, took out the requested papers and handed them to him with controlled slowness. "May I know why you arrested me, officer?" she asked in a calm but firm tone. Agent DuPont, a man with an angular face and a contemptuous attitude, grabbed the documents without immediately responding. He looked over the papers, narrowing his eyes slightly. Then he stared at her with a barely concealed grin. "This vehicle has been reported stolen."
Where did you take it?
Clarice felt her heart speed up slightly, not out of fear, but out of suppressed exasperation. She took a deep breath and replied, still with mastery, "This vehicle is mine. You have my name on the registration document." DuPont looked at her, an evil smile on his lips. He deliberately ignored her explanation and took a step back.
Get out of the vehicle, ma'am.
The tone admitted no dispute. Clarice, crossing her arms, stared at him for a few moments, weighing her options. She knew that refusing to comply risked making the situation worse. But she also knew her rights and had committed no offense. "You have no legal reason to ask me this, officer," she declared in a voice with a hint of annoyance. The policeman frowned, visibly irritated by his assertiveness. His gaze grew harder.
Don't tell me how todo my job.
With a sudden movement, he opened the door, grabbed her arm roughly and forced her out of the vehicle.
Put your hands on the oath. A shiver of humiliation ran through Clarice.
She was a judge, a woman who had dedicated her life to justice, and here she was being treated like a criminal, simply because of the color of her skin. Her heart beat hard, not out of fear, but out of suppressed anger, a dull rage that she knew too well. She was not naive. She knew that, despite her diplomas, her status, her power, for some, she would always remain an intruder in a world that did not want to see her succeed. Around her, passers-by stopped, attracted by the flashing lights and DuPont's authoritative voice. Some were whispering, others took out their phones to film. In the darkness of the street, the screens lit up like small spotlights focused on a scene of injustice. A man in a suit shook his head, a woman, visibly shocked, exchanged a worried look with her companion. "Madam, you are under arrest for suspicion of vehicle theft," DuPont declared in a mechanical tone, as if he were reciting a sentence learned by heart. It was too much. Clarice straightened her shoulders, raising her chin with the poise that made her a respected magistrate. "I am the Chief Judge of the Court of Appeals of this state," she said clearly. "You are making a serious mistake, Agent." She had hoped, for a moment, that the mere mention of his title would be enough to make DuPont waver. But instead he burst out laughing, a dry, contemptuous laugh that sounded like a slap. "Oh really? A Chief Justice driving around in a car like that? Let me guess, you borrowed it from someone?" The tone was sarcastic, laden with cruel irony. He looked at her with that barely veiled contempt, that same look she had seen so many times before, the one that said, "You have no business being here." Clarice felt her patience crumbling. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't give in to the provocation. She took a deep breath and said in a firm voice, "I advise you to immediately contact Attorney General Antoine Delacroix." She knew that saying that name would change everything. Antoine was not only his ally, but also a man of influence who would not hesitate to make his voice heard. But DuPont didn't bother to hide his amusement.
"The Attorney General?"
"Oh yes, of course. And I am the President of the United States." Some passers-by exchanged perplexed looks.
A woman whispered.
"He's making a big mistake." But DuPont paid no attention to it. With a sudden movement, he grabbed her wrists and violently handcuffed her. The cold metal bit into his skin. Clarice flinched, more out of indignation than out of pain. "You're sinking, Agent," she warned icily. DuPont did not answer and led him towards his patrol car. Across town, Antoine Delacroix had just taken off his tie, finally enjoying the respite from a long day. The Attorney General, a rigorous and respected man in his 50s, was about to pour himself a glass of bourbon when his phone vibrated. Seeing Clarice's name appear on the screen, he frowned. He picked up immediately.
"Clarice?"
"Everything is fine." But it wasn't his friend's voice that he heard. "Mr. Prosecutor, this is Agent DuPont," declared a dry and arrogant voice. "We arrested a woman claiming to be Judge Clarice Beaufort. She was driving a vehicle reported stolen."
A frozen silence fell on the line.
Antoine remained frozen, the glass suspended in his hand. "Tell me you're joking, Agent," he said in a low, threatening voice. DuPont let out a slight laugh, visibly satisfied with himself. "No, sir. She says she knows you, but you know what these people are like."
A shiver of fury ran through Antoine.
These people. He felt his stomach drop. He had heard this phrase too often, always whispered, barely veiled, but never so openly assumed. His voice became sharp as a blade. "I give you exactly 10 minutes to release her and apologize to her."
DuPont hesitated.
"But, sir."
"You heard. 10 minutes. I'm on my way."
Without waiting for a response, he hung up, grabbed his jacket and stormed out. Clarice was not a simple citizen in their eyes. She was a black woman, at the top of a system that was never designed for her. And tonight, this system brutally reminded him that he did not accept to share his power so easily. But they were going to learn that she would not let herself be crushed. When he arrived, Clarice was still in custody, handcuffed, sitting on a cold, hard bench.
The harsh neon light bathed the room, accentuating the coolness of the place.
His hands, still reddish from the tight handcuffs, rested on his knees, motionless, his gaze lost in a void which, however, seemed full of tumultuous thoughts. She showed no outward emotion, but deep inside her, A pent-up rage was boiling. As soon as she saw Delacroix cross the threshold, a spark of relief shone in her eyes. She sat up slightly, and although she didn't say a word, the tension on her shoulders seemed to dissipate a little. His ally, his longtime friend, was finally here. The presence of Delacroix brought with it the promise that justice would resume its course. The prosecutor immediately turned to Dupont, who was standing in the shadows, near the door. He could no longer escape the inexorable confrontation. Delacroix looked at him with cold intensity. Every word he spoke vibrated with an authority that left little room for dispute. You have just arrested and publicly humiliated the chief judge of the Court of Appeal on unfounded accusations. Do you realize the seriousness of your mistake? Agent Dupont, visibly in shock, lost his composure. His face closed, turning pale with the blame he knew he deserved. He tried to stammer out a defense, but Delacroix's voice cut him off. Shut up. You will write a report explaining exactly what happened, and tomorrow you will be suspended pending an internal investigation. The prosecutor did not need to add any comments. The weight of his words was enough to bring out the truth. Dupont knew that everything was lost for him. His career, built on years of abuse and prejudice, had just collapsed under the crushing light of justice.
Clarice stood up, slowly, jergas hardas still.
His body seemed larger, more imposing, in this moment of silent revolt. She walked towards Dupont, the smell of humiliation and misplaced pride wafting around him. Agent Dupont, you have abused your power and committed serious professional misconduct. I will make sure you answer for your actions, she said in a low, but terribly confident voice. The policeman, now frozen, understood too late the extent of his error. What he took to be a simple humiliation of a black woman in his service would never be ignored. What he had overlooked, thinking his position offered him protection, was now the cause of his inevitable downfall. His hands trembled, and his gaze fled from Clarice's, which left no room for pity. Clarice turned on her heel and left the police station, the prosecutor at her side. Freedom regained, certainly, but the price to pay had been heavy. She knew that the humiliation she had just suffered would mark her for life. But beyond that, what she now carried within her was a new determination. She wasn't going to let this incident fade into oblivion. It wasn't just a matter of personal revenge. It was about making people understand that these abuses had no place in a society that called itself just. Are you doing well? Delacroix asked, a note of concern in his voice. Clarice nodded slowly, her lips pursing slightly. Yes, she replied in a firm voice. But it is time for this kind of abuse to stop.
I don't plan to stop there.
The months that followed were the scene of a fierce battle. Clarice had no intention of letting the incident dissipate behind the scenes of the administration. She led the charge against Dupont, using her power, influence, and network to ensure that this abuse of power was not just a dusty memory. Ultimately, Dupont was found guilty of abuse of power and removed from the police force. His unjust arrest had become a powerful symbol of the fight against institutional racism, a striking demonstration that impunity no longer had a place in society. Clarice, for her part, continued to fight for justice. Every day, his conviction was affirmed. She was not just a Chief Justice. She was a beacon in the fight against systemic injustices. His gaze remained focused on the future, and although the humiliation of that day was still present in the back of his mind, it was nothing more than an additional source of motivation. Because she knew that as long as there were injustices to fight, she would be there, more determined than ever.